Welcome to Mindfulness, a space where we honor real stories, real struggles, and the gentle power of meditation to guide us through life's storms. The story I want to share begins in a quiet suburb in California. Sarah was 42, a mother of two, and for years believed that her marriage was unshakable. She had built her world around her husband, David, their children, and the little traditions that stitched their family together. Sunday pancakes, summer road trips, the way he once looked at her with a kind of certainty. But one evening, in a silence sharper than any argument, David confessed what she had already felt in her bones. He no longer loved her. The room seemed to collapse. For many women, this moment feels like the end of everything. The temptation to fight, to cling, to blame is overwhelming. But Sarah, though her heart cracked, did something that surprised even herself. Instead of reacting in anger, she remembered the teachings she once read from Thich Nhat Hanh. When another person makes you suffer, it is because he suffers deeply within himself. He does not need punishment, he needs help. Her first instinct wasn't to fix the marriage, because she knew love could not be forced. Instead, she turned inward. She remembered a workshop she had once attended in New York, led by Jack Kornfield, one of America's most respected meditation teachers. He had spoken about the power of pausing, of breathing before responding to life's most painful blows. So, Sarah chose stillness. Every morning she sat on the edge of her bed, lit a candle, and breathed. Just 10 minutes. She whispered to herself words from both Buddhist tradition and the Christian prayers of her childhood. Peace be with me. Peace be with him. She wasn't trying to erase the pain. It was too real for that. She was simply learning to make space for it, the way the ocean holds both storms and calm waves. The people around her expected drama, late-night calls to friends, bitter accusations, maybe even revenge. Instead, they found a woman moving with quiet dignity. Her children, confused and scared, felt steadied by her calm presence. One night, when her daughter asked, "Mom, are you mad at Dad?" Sarah simply smiled through her tears and said, "No, sweetheart. I'm practicing love that doesn't need to hold on." What made this remarkable wasn't that Sarah didn't hurt. She hurt deeply, but she didn't let the pain drive her actions. She carried the wisdom of meditation masters and spiritual teachers like Sharon Salzberg, who reminds us that love is not possession, it is presence. She also carried the words of Jesus from the Gospel of John. Perfect love drives out fear. This was her practice, not clinging, not collapsing, but standing steady in the middle of heartbreak. In a society that often glorifies anger after betrayal, Sarah's choice was radical. She showed that intelligence in a woman is not measured by how sharp her comeback is, but by how gracefully she transforms suffering into growth. Like Thich Nhat Hanh often said, "No mud, no lotus." Without the mud of broken love, Sarah might never have discovered the lotus of her inner strength. Her friends began to notice. Instead of pitying her, they admired her. They started asking how she managed to remain so centered. Sarah shared the small rituals she leaned on. Mindful walking in the park, journaling her feelings without judgment, listening to guided meditations by Tara Brach when loneliness grew heavy. Each practice was like a thread weaving her back into wholeness. This was not about saving the marriage anymore. It was about saving herself. About embodying what countless spiritual teachers across traditions, Buddhist, Christian, and beyond, have tried to show us, that freedom lies not in controlling others, but in mastering the heart. Sarah's journey had just begun, but already she was teaching everyone around her something profound. When love walks away, a woman doesn't need to shatter. With the quiet courage of mindfulness, she can stand, breathe, and even bloom. After the storm of David's confession, Sarah entered a season of silence. She still went to work, still packed lunches for the kids, still kept life moving, but inside she was standing at the edge of a cliff. The old life she knew had ended, and yet she sensed something new was possible if she dared to step into it. This was the moment when many women spiral into self-blame. The questions come like arrows. Was I not enough? Did I do something wrong? Could I have changed this outcome if I tried harder? Sarah felt these questions too. They kept her awake at night. But then, one morning, she remembered the words of Pema Chodron, the American Buddhist nun whose teachings had once touched her. You are the sky. Everything else, it's just the weather. That thought anchored her. Yes, her husband's love had faded. Yes, her family's shape was shifting, but she was still the sky. The storm would pass, so she decided to practice standing alone. Not as a punishment, not as loneliness, but as a way of rediscovering herself. She started small. On Saturday mornings, instead of waiting for family routines, she took herself to a cafe downtown. She ordered coffee, opened her journal, and wrote whatever surfaced. Sometimes it was anger, sometimes grief, sometimes memories of when she and David had been young and fearless. And sometimes, unexpectedly, she found gratitude for her children's laughter, for her body still carrying her through, for the chance to begin again. One afternoon, she attended a mindfulness talk at a community center. The speaker quoted Thich Nhat Hanh. To be beautiful means to be yourself. You don't need to be accepted by others. You need to accept yourself. The words hit her like sunlight breaking through clouds. For so long, she had defined herself through her marriage. Now, she began to ask, who am I when I am simply me? Her journey wasn't just Buddhist. Raised in a Christian family, she still carried the language of scripture in her bones. On nights when the ache was unbearable, she turned to the Psalms. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted, she read, and it felt like a hand on her shoulder. Her faith, like her meditation, became a companion. Two rivers flowing into the same sea of healing. The most surprising thing was how her children responded. At first, they were unsettled by the changes, the separate dinners, the absence of their father's voice in the evenings. But gradually, they absorbed their mother's calm strength. One evening, her teenage son said, "Mom, you're different. You're stronger." Sarah smiled. Not because she felt strong, but because she knew strength wasn't about feeling invincible. It was about showing up, day after day, with honesty and heart. She also leaned into community. A friend invited her to a local meditation group led by a student of Jon Kabat-Zinn, the pioneer of mindfulness-based stress reduction in the US. Sitting in that circle, breathing together with strangers, Sarah felt less alone. The teacher reminded them, pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. Suffering is the story we add to pain. Sarah held on to that. It was liberating. Little by little, she began to see that standing alone was not a tragedy. It was an opening. She signed up for a pottery class. She started jogging in the mornings, listening to Tara Brach's soothing voice guide her through radical self-compassion practices. She even laughed more, real, unexpected laughter that bubbled up in the middle of ordinary moments. Her friends noticed again. They had expected to see a woman shrinking. Instead, they saw a woman expanding. The secret was not that Sarah had avoided grief. She faced it head-on, but she refused to drown in it. She allowed her heartbreak to soften her rather than harden her. In that softening, she found resilience. This was the beginning of her transformation. And in her quiet strength, she reminded everyone around her of what Thich Nhat Hanh taught. The most precious gift we can offer others is our presence. When mindfulness embraces those we love, they will bloom like flowers. Even as her marriage faded, Sarah was blooming. Not because she was untouched by pain, but because she learned to stand alone. And in that standing, she was learning to truly stand as herself. As the months passed, Sarah discovered that healing wasn't just about her own heart. Something deeper was calling her. A chance to transform not only her pain, but also the way she looked at David, the man who had once been her world. In the beginning, every glance at him triggered waves of hurt. Seeing him laugh with the kids, knowing his affection for her had dimmed, was almost unbearable. But then she remembered the teaching of Thich Nhat Hanh. Understanding is love's other name. If you don't understand, you can't love. One evening, after the children had gone to bed, she sat quietly and asked herself, what must David be carrying that led him to this? Not as a way of excusing his choices, but as a way of softening her own bitterness. She thought about the pressures he had faced, the silent disappointments that perhaps he never voiced, the loneliness he might have felt even when they were side by side. This shift did not happen overnight. Some days she still felt anger rise like fire, but instead of letting it burn her, she learned to breathe with it. John Kabat-Zinn's words often echoed in her mind. You can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf. So when David came to pick up the kids, instead of greeting him with coldness, she practiced neutrality. She breathed in, breathed out, and silently repeated a mantra she had learned from a mindfulness retreat. May you be well. May you find peace. At first, it felt forced, but over time, the words became lighter, less like an obligation and more like a release. Her friends were stunned. How can you be so kind to him after what he's done? One asked. Sarah smiled gently. Because carrying hate is like drinking poison and waiting for someone else to die. I don't want that for myself or for my kids. This compassion didn't mean she wanted him back. It didn't mean she denied the hurt. It simply meant she was free. As the Buddha once taught, holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal. You are the one who gets burned. Sarah refused to keep holding the coal. She also found inspiration in the Christian tradition she had grown up with. She recalled the words of Jesus, forgive not 7 times, but 70 times 7. Forgiveness, she realized, wasn't a one-time event. It was a practice, something she had to return to daily, especially when old wounds resurfaced. In practical terms, she set boundaries. Compassion didn't mean letting David walk over her. It meant choosing her responses with clarity and strength. She established routines for the kids, divided responsibilities fairly, and protected her own emotional space. In doing so, she modeled for her children that love and self-respect can coexist. The most surprising outcome was how her children thrived. They expected tension, anger, maybe even shouting between their parents. Instead, they saw 2 adults navigating separation with dignity. One evening, her daughter whispered, "Mom, I feel safe with you. You don't hate Dad." That moment was proof to Sarah that her path of compassion was not only healing her, but also shaping the emotional landscape of her children. She continued to deepen her practice through community. She joined an online course led by Sharon Salzberg, whose teachings on loving kindness meditation resonated deeply. In those guided practices, Sarah sent kindness not just to herself, but to David, to her children, and even to people she struggled with at work. Bit by bit, she felt her heart expand. Of course, compassion didn't erase the past, but it transformed how the past lived inside her. Instead of being a wound that festered, it became a scar, a reminder of pain, yes, but also of resilience and growth. This was the intelligence of a woman who understood that real strength isn't about winning battles against others. It's about choosing peace within. Sarah embodied what Tara Brach calls radical acceptance, the willingness to meet life as it is, without resistance, and to let compassion guide the way forward. And so, Sarah was no longer simply surviving her family's breakup. She was becoming something larger, something freer. Through compassion, she discovered that even when love in a marriage ends, love itself does not die. It changes form, it widens, it becomes something greater than possession. It becomes a way of living. When the dust of heartbreak began to settle, Sarah realized something important. Compassion was healing her heart, but she also needed to rebuild her life in concrete, practical ways. Meditation had given her the inner strength to breathe through pain. Now, she needed to shape a future that was hers alone. The first step was financial independence. For years, she and David had shared responsibilities unevenly. He managed most of the money while she focused on the kids and her part-time job. Suddenly, that arrangement was no longer sustainable. At first, Sarah felt overwhelmed. Bills, bank accounts, insurance policies, they all seemed like a foreign language. But then she remembered something she had once heard in a lecture by Tara Brach. When we trust the ground beneath us, even one small step is enough. So Sarah took one step at a time. She met with a financial advisor, asked questions without shame, and began learning how to manage her own resources. Each small victory, a balanced budget, an emergency savings account, felt like reclaiming a piece of herself. Next came her career. Sarah had put her ambitions on hold for years, believing that being a good wife and mother meant sacrificing her dreams. But now she asked herself, what if independence could be part of my healing? She dusted off her resume, took a professional development course, and applied for jobs she had once thought were out of reach. It wasn't easy. Rejection stung. Interviews were nerve-wracking. But every time she felt discouraged, she returned to her practice. On mornings before interviews, she would sit quietly, close her eyes, and recall the words of Thich Nhat Hanh. Smile, breathe, and go slowly. That simple ritual helped her walk into each room with calm presence instead of desperation. Eventually, she landed a position that not only paid the bills, but also gave her a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. Her independence extended beyond finances and work. She began to explore what made her feel alive outside of roles and obligations. On weekends when the kids were with David, she resisted the temptation to sink into loneliness. Instead, she experimented. A pottery class, hiking trails she had always wanted to try, even salsa dancing, where she laughed at herself as she stumbled over steps but felt free in a way she hadn't in decades. The more she stepped into her independence, the more she saw that it wasn't about doing it all alone. It was about trusting herself to create a life that was authentic. This resonated with something she once read from Jon Kabat-Zinn. You can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf. Independence was her surfboard. It didn't remove the waves, but it allowed her to ride them with balance. Her children also noticed the change. They saw a mother who was no longer defined by loss, but by possibility. Instead of speaking only about what had been broken, she began to share her excitement about new projects, new hobbies, new horizons. Her son teased her once, saying, "Mom, you've got more of a social life than I do." They all laughed, and in that laughter was healing. At church one Sunday, Sarah reflected on her journey. The pastor spoke about the story of the Israelites in the wilderness, wandering after leaving Egypt. Sometimes, he said, freedom feels like loss before it feels like blessing. Those words stayed with her. Freedom, she realized, had come at a cost, her marriage. But it also carried a gift, the chance to rebuild her life on her own terms. Sarah was not naive. She knew there would still be lonely nights, unexpected challenges, and moments when the weight of responsibility felt heavy. But she also knew she had cultivated tools that would carry her through. Mindfulness, prayer, community, and the quiet courage of a woman who has faced loss and chosen growth. This stage of her journey showed everyone around her that intelligence is not just emotional, it is also practical. A smart woman, when her family falls apart, learns to anchor herself not only in compassion, but also in independence. She rebuilds her life with grace, turning brokenness into an opportunity for renewal. As Thich Nhat Hanh often reminded his students, the seed of suffering in you may be strong, but don't wait until you have no more suffering before allowing yourself to be happy. Sarah was living proof of that. Even as she carried scars, she was allowing happiness back in, not as a far-off dream, but as a daily practice of independence and joy. By the time Sarah had found her footing again, emotionally, financially, and spiritually, something unexpected began to happen. Her story started rippling outward. Friends, co-workers, even neighbors began approaching her quietly, asking how she managed to carry herself with such calm after her marriage ended. At first, Sarah shrugged it off. She didn't see herself as a teacher, only as someone trying to survive. But then she remembered the teaching of Sharon Salzberg. When we share our story, we offer a mirror for others to see their own strength. So she began sharing. Not in a dramatic way, but in honest, simple conversations over coffee or walks in the park. She told her friends about the mornings she still woke up aching, but how she had learned to sit with that ache instead of fighting it. She shared how meditation, even 10 minutes of breathing, kept her steady when emotions threatened to take over. She talked about forgiving David, not because it excused him, but because it freed her. One of her co-workers, going through her own divorce, listened with tears in her eyes. "You make me believe it's possible," she whispered. That was when Sarah realized that her personal healing had become more than personal. It was a gift she could offer others. She decided to take it further. With encouragement from her meditation group, Sarah started a small circle in her living room on Thursday evenings. Just a handful of women at first, some separated, some widowed, some simply struggling with the chaos of modern life. They would light a candle, sit together in silence, and then share their stories. Sarah didn't preach. She simply facilitated. She might read a passage from Thich Nhat Hanh about mindful breathing, or play a short recording from John Kabat-Zinn or Tara Brach. Sometimes she read verses from the Bible that had brought her comfort, reminding everyone that wisdom flows through many traditions. Then they would practice together, breathing, listening, holding space. The impact was profound. One woman confessed that she had been drowning in bitterness but found her heart softening after practicing loving-kindness meditation. Another said that for the first time in months, she was able to sleep peacefully. What amazed Sarah most was not that she had all the answers, but that by simply gathering, they all discovered answers within themselves. Word spread. The circle grew. Sarah's living room soon overflowed, so she moved the gatherings to a local community center. They called it the Lotus Group, inspired by the phrase Thich Nhat Hanh, repeated often. No mud, no lotus. The idea was simple. Pain is the mud, but it can give rise to the lotus of compassion and wisdom. Sarah also collaborated with her church, offering mindfulness workshops alongside scripture study. She quoted both Buddhist teachings and the words of Jesus, showing how the two traditions could complement each other in the search for peace. People found comfort in the way she wove these voices together, creating a bridge between East and West, between silence and prayer, between suffering and hope. Through this work, Sarah began to see that her pain had a purpose. The heartbreak that once threatened to destroy her had instead opened her heart to others. She was no longer just a woman surviving divorce. She was a guide, a companion, a living example of resilience. One evening, after a particularly moving session, a young mother came up to her and said, "You've shown me that I don't have to be ashamed of my brokenness. I can use it to grow." Sarah smiled, tears in her eyes. That was exactly the truth she had been living into all along. In those moments, Sarah realized she was no longer defined by what she had lost. She was defined by what she was giving. And what she was giving was not advice or quick fixes, but presence. The same presence she had cultivated in her own darkest nights. As Tara Brach often says, the boundary to what we can accept is the boundary to our freedom. Sarah had accepted her suffering, and in doing so, she had found freedom. Now she was helping others taste that same freedom. Her journey was no longer a private struggle. It had become a movement, however small, a reminder that when one woman heals, she creates ripples of healing in her family, her community, and beyond. For a long time, Sarah thought her life after divorce would be defined by survival. Just keeping her balance felt like enough. But as the seasons changed, she noticed something stirring within her, something lighter, more playful. It was joy, peeking through the cracks of her once broken heart. It began in small ways. She found herself laughing with her kids over silly jokes, a laughter that wasn't forced but natural. She caught herself smiling on morning jogs, the air cool on her skin, her body moving strong and free. One afternoon in her pottery class, as clay spun between her hands, she realized she wasn't just shaping bowls. She was shaping a new life. This was the fruit of her mindfulness practice. As Thich Nhat Hanh taught, sometimes your joy is the source of your smile, but sometimes your smile can be the source of your joy. Sarah practiced smiling more often, not out of denial, but out of trust that joy could coexist with scars. Her children noticed first. "Mom, you look happy," her daughter said one evening, almost surprised. Sarah laughed softly. "I am, not all the time, but more than I thought I could be." That honesty itself was joy, the freedom to feel whole without pretending. It wasn't long before friends began nudging her about dating again. At first, Sarah resisted. The idea of opening her heart after so much pain felt terrifying. But then she remembered something she once heard in a talk by Jack Cornfield. "In the end, everything is about love. How well did you love? How fully did you let yourself be loved?" So she didn't rush. She practiced patience. She let herself be curious instead of fearful. She went on walks, coffee dates, conversations that sometimes fizzled and sometimes sparked. She approached it as meditation in motion, listening deeply, speaking honestly, and staying grounded in herself no matter the outcome. One evening, sitting across from a kind man who shared her love of books and hiking, she realized she wasn't searching for someone to complete her. She was already whole. What she was open to was companionship, someone to walk alongside her on the path she had chosen for herself. Whether or not it blossomed into romance, she felt gratitude simply for the reminder that her heart was still capable of opening. This was joy, not the naive happiness of pretending life was perfect, but the mature joy that comes from embracing life as it is, messy, unpredictable, yet full of possibility. Her community work reflected this too. The women in the Lotus group began to notice her radiance. "You give us hope that there's life after heartbreak," one woman told her. Sarah nodded. "Not just life," she replied. "There's joy. Different than before, but real." Spiritually, she found herself connecting even more deeply with teachings that celebrated renewal. In her church, she listened to Easter sermons about resurrection and new life. In her meditation practice, she returned to the Buddha's reminder that each morning we are born again. What we do today is what matters most. These voices, though from different traditions, harmonized in her heart. She realized joy didn't mean forgetting the past. It meant carrying it lightly, like a stone polished smooth by the river. The past would always be part of her story, but it no longer weighed her down. By choosing joy, Sarah showed that intelligence in a woman isn't just about surviving pain with dignity, it's about daring to live fully again. Her example proved that when we practice mindfulness, forgiveness, and independence, joy eventually returns. And when it does, it's deeper, steadier, and more enduring than before. Sarah was not moving on from her story. She was moving forward into a life where healing and joy walked side by side. One quiet evening, after her children had gone to sleep, Sarah sat by the window with a cup of tea. The moon hung low, steady in the night sky, and she allowed herself to breathe in gratitude. Looking back, she almost couldn't believe how far she had come. Once, she thought the end of her marriage was the end of her life. But through mindfulness, prayer, and compassion, she discovered that endings can be disguised beginnings. She had walked through heartbreak with dignity, rebuilt her independence with courage, and opened herself to joy with trust. And in doing so, she had become more herself than ever before. Her journey wasn't perfect. There were setbacks, moments of grief, and nights of loneliness. But she learned that perfection was never the goal. Presence was. As Thich Nhat Hanh taught, the present moment is filled with joy and happiness. If you are attentive, you will see it. Sarah had lived this truth. By staying present, she had found healing in the middle of sorrow, strength in the middle of uncertainty, and community in the middle of solitude. She reflected, too, on the wisdom that guided her along the way. From Buddhist teachers like Sharon Salzberg, John Kabat-Zinn, and Jack Kornfield, she had learned the art of mindfulness and loving kindness. From her Christian roots, she had drawn strength in forgiveness and resurrection. From the words of the Buddha and Jesus alike, she found a shared thread. That love, real, spacious love, has the power to transform everything. Most of all, she realized her story was no longer just about her. It was about every woman standing at the edge of heartbreak, wondering if she will survive. Sarah wanted her life to whisper to them, yes, you can. Not only survive, but bloom. And this is where mindfulness comes in. The channel exists to hold stories like Sarah's, stories that remind us we are not alone, that pain can be a teacher, and that healing is possible when we meet life with compassion and presence. Mindfulness is a place where East and West, meditation and prayer, wisdom and practice come together to guide us gently through life's hardest chapters. As Sarah finally closed her journal that night, she wrote one last line to herself. I am no longer afraid of endings, because in every ending I have learned to find a beginning. That is the quiet intelligence of a woman who has walked through fire and emerged not hardened, but softened, open, and free. And it is the heart of what mindfulness will always share, that through awareness, compassion, and the courage to begin again, we can all turn our brokenness into a path of beauty.